Welcome back, everyone, to Profluence Sports. Here today, making, I think, right? You said, Aaron, this is your first podcast in space, so we'll make it a good one. So appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I guess before we get into the good stuff, just give us a quick 30 seconds, 1 minute, who you are, how you got here, how you started working for Will Ventures, and then the overview on Will Ventures, and then we'll start to dive right into the weeds.
Yeah, so my name's Aaron Miller. I'm an investor on the team at Will Ventures. I joined around a year ago, and the way I got here is I'm originally from the New York area, so grew up just north of the city. Never saw myself going into VC. Went to Harvard, undergrad, studied government, spent most of my time writing for newspapers, and thought I'd spend my career either in politics or journalism. Got to the end of school and realized I didn't want to work in that space, but very much did want to do something that I cared about. And the other thing I always loved growing up was everything sports entertainment. I grew up playing, watching, basically everything, and wanted to make a career in the space. Didn't even know what that meant, but ended up getting my first job out of college at Endeavor, the large agency. Worked for an agent in the New York office, and then got the chance to go work for the NBA League office. I was based in New York, but working on international strategy, and I speak Spanish, so ended up working a lot on our Latin America growth plans. So worked on things like our media and sponsorships in the region, things like the Mexico City games, and really got exposure across the league business. And then after that, decided to go to business school. So spent a couple of years at Stanford in the Bay. And in that time, my goal was really to see the early stage of sports entertainment because I felt like I'd worked at a couple of big companies, was going to be in the Bay, wanted to see what early stage tech around the space looked like. So I did a couple of things. First, I worked for an early stage video game startup called Manticore Games. And then my second year, I started working for a Stanford grad who was running Lionel Messi's family office because Messi was just moving to Miami, wanting to do his first few venture deals like a lot of American athletes had been doing. So I would help them with some of their thesis development, their sourcing, diligence, and really got exposure to this intersection of early stage tech, investing, and sports entertainment. Saw all of these tailwinds behind the space, which I'm sure we're going to talk about now. And then met this Will Ventures team and hit it off and joined around a year ago. So that's my story.
Super cool. I want to go back to one thing real quick because it's something on the bucket list. I try to do one new hard thing a year. So I've done a triathlon. I read the whole Bible. I do like every year I try to do one like super hard thing, and learn Spanish is like on there at some point. So family thing, just picked it up through school. What was the story there?
It's a good question. Not a family thing. My family's actually all from Montreal, so they speak French. In college, I went to study abroad in Argentina. I ended up spending 6 months there, taking all classes in Spanish, also doing some internships, and really just immersed myself for 6 months. Like, didn't pick up the phone and like call anyone in English, even just spoke Spanish 24/7. And that's the way I think you have to do it. You just have to like completely lock in, immerse yourself, and only do that one thing. It's honestly hard to do when you're living in the US.
Yes. Super cool. All right. Well, maybe I just got to go and work out of Argentina for a year or something. And anyway, super, super cool. And I guess on that, when you were there, sporting experience in Argentina versus the US or Canada and what you're used to, or, what was it like there just from a different pulse internationally?
So I went to a Boca Juniors River Plate match there, and that's the equivalent of like the Yankees Red Sox. That's the craziest sports environment I've ever seen. Like, I've been to NBA finals games. I've been to see a Michigan State game at the Big House. Boca River in Argentina, overall, like all Argentinian soccer matches, it's a level of like fandom that you've never seen. And I think honestly, a lot of the world is like that. You look at like EuroLeague basketball, some of these Greek and Serbian teams, the environment is insane. It makes like American fans look really tame.
Yeah, we got to figure out how to bring that back a little bit. I know that's a big thing in the basketball world, just especially in Europe. Like it's nuts, but super cool. So I guess give us the rundown on Will Ventures. I believe it was, you guys have done a few funds now or whatever. Give us the rundown on, what the firm's investing in, the size, where you guys are looking, just, high level overview, and we'll start to dig deeper into all that.
Yeah, so the high level on Will Ventures is we're an early stage fund focused on sports, entertainment, and consumer. So we were started in 2019 by Brian Riley and Isaiah Kasavensky. They raised a first fund of $55 million. Then in 2022, we closed a second fund of $150 million. And we're currently investing out of that all across those spaces I mentioned. So we've done everything from emerging sports leagues, like we backed Shaun White's new snowboarding league called the Snow League, also Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy's new golf league, TGL, But primarily it's around software, B2C and B2B around these spaces. So for example, we backed the founders of FanDuel to go build a crypto-based casino and sportsbook. We backed a Fanatics corporate strategy executive who teamed up with Greg Olson, the NFL legend, to go build a marketplace for youth sports. We backed Just Women's Sports, the leading media platform for women's sports. So we've kind of invested in all of these different pockets of the space. I'm just trying to back category leaders. That's our goal.
Yeah, and as you came in, obviously you had an interest in sports. They saw this opportunity. How do you guys view the space as a whole, right? As this opportunity, you view it still very early days, you see more and more opportunity coming into it. As you get to a second fund, you're into it now a little bit over a couple years from Messi's side and then now Will Ventures. What's the state of the space, especially on the early stage side from what you guys see at Will Ventures?
I mean, when the firm was started in 2019, I think Brian and Isaiah had to make the case for why sports was an emerging asset class. And 5 years later, that's what's happening. Like there are a lot of late stage funds investing in team stakes. There are a lot of late stage and growth stage funds investing in the nuts and bolts of sports. So that could be anything from fan engagement technology to youth sports, streaming platforms, to assets like Unrivaled, who's investing in academies and experiences for kids. We've seen a lot of smart capital coming into the space, and that makes us happy because it means there's more smart capital looking to invest in these assets. And hopefully we're investing at the early stage, and all those later stage funds will be buyers of the businesses, buyers or, partners of the businesses that we're funding at the early stage.
Now, from an emerging league standpoint, you mentioned a big part of the software tech side. Was any investments in 2019 into emerging fund or out of the first fund into these new leagues? And right, it sort of seems like the last couple years we've seen more of that. How do you guys view that? What interests you in certain ones? What's just the lowdown on emerging leagues for you guys?
Yeah, we've done a ton of thinking around this space because so many emerging leagues have popped up in the last few years. You got TGL and Snow League, which we invest in. You also have Unrivaled, Love B. Almost every single sport has had its own 2 or 3 leagues pop up, and a good amount of them have raised serious venture funding. There's an interesting thesis behind there because for the longest time, venture capital at its core is really about backing a company at the early stage and betting on it to become $1 billion+ business. For the longest time, it was really just technology companies that could scale that quickly and that big. And then I think a few years ago, people started realizing, okay, a media property and specifically a sports league could get that big. If you could build the next UFC or even the next NBA, that's a 10 or even $100 billion outcome. So a lot of money started flowing into this space, and we've definitely refined our thesis on what makes a good emerging league investment. Just a few things is there has to be a way to make money from day one. So you have to have like an outside advantage to capture fans' attention and drive sponsorship and drive media dollars, because these things are super expensive to put on. And often if you're not making money in year one and have a path to profitability, it's going to be hard to fundraise. It's going to be hard to hit your long-term plan. The second thing is you need some sort of moat to attract the best talent in your sport, because you'll see a lot of leagues pay up for the biggest stars in their sport in year one. But then the question is, what is your unfair advantage to kind of keep them incentivized long-term? And I mean, sports leagues are essentially, the core competency is like collective bargaining. There are lockouts every few years in the major leagues. Like that's something they have to have buttoned up. And then the last thing we've thought a lot about is governance, because there are a lot of different models to put these leagues together. You could have the tour model, you could have the franchise model where you're selling franchises, kind of like TGL is doing right now. These are super complicated structures, and it's just important to have those things understood up front. So that's kind of the high level how we think about things.
That's super cool. And one thing from macro, and I don't know how long this will take, but I think over time with all these new emerging leagues, if they can withstand and withhold, which I think a good amount will, which is part of your thesis again too, if we only need a few to win, which makes it super interesting, is the path from high school to college to pro is being transformed. We're going to probably start to see, instead of high school kids going to academies, and then maybe they don't need college if there's pro league infrastructure where they can go make real money as long as the education was backed in. So I think that's another interesting thing. If you look at flag football or Unrivaled or snowboarding or whatever it is, I think there's a lot of interesting macro things taking place as well, making them a little bit more interesting. Usually people go, oh, what are you looking for? What sort of makes things attractive from a company standpoint? I guess let's go on the reverse. What turns you guys off on certain opportunities, or what are the things where you're like, and not just from emerging leagues, but just tech companies, sports in general? What are some of those? I hate the word red flag, green flag, all that Gen Z talk, but like, what are some of those red flags that you guys see might make you not, execute on an opportunity?
I mean, at its core, early stage investing is just about backing incredible people who are insanely smart, who have a right to win their space, and are just going to do everything possible to make their business a success. And I don't, that's not new news. Like any
Yeah.
seed stage venture investor is going to tell you that. So it's really about that. It's really about like you have to validate that this person wants to build this business more than anything, and has a right to win the space. And you really got to believe in the person you're backing at this stage.
Yeah. And from a due diligence standpoint, outside of, I know you mentioned a few of the people of what they had done previously, outside of if you've done something big already, how do you evaluate that, right? Because some of the biggest founders in the world, they had never built anything before. Zuckerberg or, Aaron B. These guys. How do you find those emerging ones as well? Or how do you evaluate that, or try to best evaluate that?
It's a great point. Like some of the greatest founders ever were college kids who started
Yeah.
in their dorm room, and like being the first dollar into Mark Zuckerberg might have looked a lot less smart then than it does now.
Right.
I think sports and entertainment is a unique space because building something in this space requires understanding how sports and entertainment works as a business and kind of having the network across it, because so many people would love to get to the head of corporate strategy at the NBA or Endeavor, or understand how Adam Silver is thinking about the future of his business. But it's just really hard to do that from the outside. Whereas let's say you're building in a really unsexy space, you might be able to get to those people and like build that understanding more easily. So one thing that we look for is whenever someone's building a specific vertical of our spaces, that could be like an emerging league, that could be a sports book, that could be something in youth sports, that they have like a right to win, like an unfair understanding of that space, and then also the network to make their business happen.
I agree. It is an interesting thing in sports. Whereas the general, you're going more consumer, you're going broad. There's maybe not as many gatekeepers from those Facebook, Airbnb, whatever. Whereas in sports, you definitely need to get into some of those pockets, or just some emerging leagues from creators, right? We're seeing a lot of creators. I know you've put some stuff out on the internet about that. How are you viewing that? That mixes into leagues a little bit. We've seen some creators go and try to start some things. Mr. Beast is putting on a bunch of stuff like that. How do you view that world of this mixing of media, entertainment, and sports?
Yeah, I've thought so much about this topic because so much of sports fandom is moving from watching professional leagues to watching the biggest creators in the world play sports. And so initially you kind of just had, like, if you wanted to watch basketball, you're probably watching like LeBron James playing the NBA. Now you could watch a Jesser. You could watch a Tristan Jass, guys who have gigantic audiences on YouTube. You could even watch Mr. Beast. He put on a basketball game a few weeks ago with some of the biggest YouTubers from the US and also LATAM. And so I've been thinking like, all right, if you are making money playing basketball, making basketball content, like, does that make you a professional athlete? Arguably. And I'm just super interested that a lot of time, especially Gen Z time, is like moving towards these creators and what that means for the future of the space. I think these individual like sports creators like Bryson DeChambeau's and Destroying, they have amazing businesses. And then you could also build properties around them. Like you've seen Kings League, a new emerging soccer league, stood up basically on the backs of creators who effectively own the teams. You also have properties like Kaze TV in Brazil, which is an emerging media player, which is built alongside one of the biggest Twitch streamers in Brazil. So we've just spent a lot of time thinking about this space.
Yeah, it's super interesting because it all comes down to distribution, right? And now it seems like, and we'll flip this into youth sports a little bit, but the younger generations watch athletes or creators more than just you grew up watching the team or of the local area, whoever your family watched. Now, as you guys look into youth sports, obviously you said you did youth things, so you have some investment in the space. How do you view that? We're seeing a ton of money and interest come into that right now, but it sort of fits in a weird, like, is it VC a little bit? Is it, leagues? Like, right, there's only so much that can fit for a firm like you. How do you guys view that space and navigating within it?
Yeah, youth sports is a really interesting one. Basically, every generalist investor at growth and later stage I talk with says they're looking at youth sports. Yeah. And It's interesting asset class because around 50% of the value in youth sports is in the academies, the camps, the experiences. Those are very hands-on businesses. They're not really venture backable, but that's why you've seen a lot of later stage capital, like Unrivaled, trying to roll up more of those elite academies. And then there's kind of the rest of the value chain. There's like merchandise, there's streaming, there's other like scheduling and league and team management softwares. You mentioned this company that we're really excited about. We invested in a company called Youth Inc., where a Fanatics corporate strategy executive teamed up with Greg Olson, so the NFL legend and current commentator. And they're essentially trying to build Fanatics for youth sports. So an e-commerce marketplace where you can buy spirit wear and also team gear. And they have a big content operation that's driving parents and also kids, like youth athletes, to the platform. We're super excited about them.
You mentioned, and you talked about this earlier, and just again now on the founder, the team, and the relationships they have, it makes it interesting to you. But you also talked a little bit there about the uniqueness they're bringing from a content or leverage standpoint. Anything else as you look to companies or leagues that are outside of the founder that make them intriguing, like a sort of an advantage that can be built, like it's not something earned per se, or any little things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a ton of thinking about creator-led brands. In the past few years, you've seen everything from Mr. Beast Feastables to Hailey Bieber's Road become huge businesses, and they have an unfair advantage because the person who's the face of the brand has this parasocial relationship with their customers. So that means, higher LTVs, higher customer loyalty. And so I think that's a really interesting strategy. But you've also seen examples of creator-led brands that haven't worked out because maybe they're building in a category where they don't have a right to win, or maybe the product just isn't as good as people would want for that category. So I would say creator-led brands and creator-led businesses as a whole, like you've even seen some creators building software businesses. Those are really interesting to us as a theme. But then there's a lot of criteria that you need to apply to make sure that you're investing in the right creator-led brand.
Yeah. From a sports media, I don't know, you said sports media, entertainment, or consumer, right? That was the third one. What's the breakdown? Has it been mainly sports? Has it been a mix of things in between? How do you guys break down those buckets, or how do you view them, like underneath category wise?
Yeah, so we say we invest in sports, entertainment, and consumer, and you could throw media in there. And honestly, I think there's just been a convergence of all of those buckets because content and commerce are just getting more and more linked. It used to be 20 years ago that if you were watching a basketball game, you wanted to buy that jersey, you would have to go onto the internet, try to find nba.com/store and buy a jersey there. Now, like, you're on YouTube, there's a click now button. You're on TikTok, there's TikTok shop. You're on Instagram, maybe your favorite creator is trying to sell you a product they've developed. So we've seen like sports and entertainment, IP, and just consumption getting more linked. And then when it comes to like what's sports versus entertainment, Timothée Chalamet is arguably the biggest actor in the world right now. Where people are seeing him right now is courtside at Knicks games. Or Mr. Beast, biggest YouTuber right now, he's putting on basketball games that are rivaling NBA playoff numbers. So I just think it's a really interesting time where all of this stuff is kind of coming together.
Yeah, it is. And consumer, like, do you view that as like CPG? Like, would you do anything in there? Like, how broad do you keep it versus how tight?
Yeah, I mean, CPG is a big part of consumer. You're talking food and beverage, beauty, apparel is also a category we'd look at. I think sneakers is a really interesting category where there hasn't been as much innovation as there could be. And then there's also consumer-facing software. We've invested in a couple of businesses there.
Super cool. I guess going into the second half of 2025 now, what's got you excited? Where are you guys looking? Any new areas? Anything that's got just spinning the wheels, right? Like you looked at emerging leagues and then creator brands. Like anything new or new areas where you're like, oh, like this could be a next hot space, or this is pretty interesting or pretty cool?
Yeah, one more thing we're really excited about as a fund is looking internationally. When we first started, it wasn't part of our mandate, but as we've grown, we've realized how many opportunities there are to apply the same business models that have worked in the US to other markets. Because you think of the US, there, as we talked about before, there's a lot of smart capital coming in. Sports as a whole and entertainment are getting more professionalized, institutionalized. Then international markets have that same passion like for example, what we talked about in Argentina, but then the business is lagging behind. So we thought about what if you could take what we've learned about sports betting from how it played out in North America and apply it to other markets. How about what we know about ticketing here, apply it to other markets? So a couple of years ago, we invested in a Latin American business called Fanky. It's essentially trying to be the ticket master for Latin America, because so much of ticketing is physical pay stubs in the region right now, and they're trying to digitize that experience. They've done extremely well in Mexico and Colombia, so we're excited about them. We also invested in a Canadian online casino business called Betty. They've grown really quickly. They have an interesting strategy where their marketing appeals to women who are an under-indexed definitely demo of the online casino space. And so we're increasingly looking international. I would say that's one thing we're excited about.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And, you hear India a lot, Middle East, right? You're hearing a lot of these spaces. And it's interesting because you can build, like if you look at Dream, whatever it's called in India, it's essentially they just took DraftKings and built it in India and, created another billion-dollar entity. So it's like you can definitely do that across different categories in different regions now. Yeah, Aaron, as we close out, where can people learn more about Will Ventures? What's the website? Where can people reach out and just, get the lowdown on all you guys are doing and, learn more about Will Ventures?
Yeah, we're definitely excited about what's coming at Will Ventures. We're now a team of 10, so a lot of good stuff is going to be coming soon. We write a lot of content, so you could follow us on the Will Ventures Substack. You can follow me on LinkedIn. On top of the longer POVs, I'm often just writing, whatever pops into my mind about sports entertainment on a daily basis. And no, otherwise, just really appreciate you having me on. Big fan of the platform you're building and excited to find ways to work together.
I love it. Awesome. All right, Aaron. Well, appreciate you coming on today.